Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, June 25th. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We came down for a couple of doctor's appointments, and I had lunch with my dad today, and we'll be heading back up to Maine first thing in the morning tomorrow. My guest this week, Ben Springwater, is also heading to Maine this summer because his wife's family has been going up to Northeast Harbor for generations. When I spoke with him this week, he was in San Francisco. He is the co-founder of Matter, which is a social reading app available for iPhone, iPad, the iOS system in beta. And he provided me with a link that you will find in the show notes, and that will give you an access to Matter in beta. So if you click on it, you go right into the App Store. You'll want to click on it on your iPhone or your iPad to do it. And it's worth checking out. You'll hear why I think that's so in the interview. Also, this episode, I will be talking about Prime Day, and I will tell you about a video game tech tip that I learned from my grandson, James, who is 15. In news, Prime Day has come and gone. Amazon puts out a release that gives a lot of sort of anecdotal information about how the 2 days went. People who estimate the revenues that the company received in the 2-day sale, there was quite a variety in estimates. Morgan Stanley did some number crunching that they came up with a number of $6.8 billion in revenue for Amazon, and almost half of that being accounted for by third-party sellers on the platform. Bank of America's analysis had it at $9.55 billion, and then Adobe Analytics had it at $11 billion. So a couple of days of pretty good sales at Amazon. One of the things which the release pointed out, which pleased me, was that in the 2 weeks before Prime Day, when Amazon was promoting small businesses that sell at Amazon.com, customers spent over $1.9 billion on small business products. And this was a pretty compelling promotion, because the deal was if you spent $10 at one of these small businesses, which they were easy to find out in the promotion, you'd get $10 back that you could spend on Prime Day. So I found one, and I haven't been able to go back and get the details on it, but I just clicked on one of the small businesses at random, and it was a company in the New York City area that had been founded by a woman who had migrated from Central America, I'm pretty sure, a number of years ago, and had set up a retail business that had a wide variety of interesting products. And the one that came in at the close to the $10 level was 6 fly swatters for $13.95. So I bought them, and in a summer cottage, you can't have too many fly swatters, and they're colorful, they're long, they're real snappy in the action and high quality. And I just get kind of a lift when I think that I get these fly swatters by supporting a small business that is having a pretty successful run, it looks, on Amazon.com. Amazon did say Prime Day 2021 was the biggest 2-day period ever for Amazon's third-party sellers, nearly all of which are small and medium-sized businesses, growing even more than Amazon's retail business. Now, some of this, I think, is probably aimed at discussions in Washington, D.C. about whether Amazon's platform is a fair platform. Do they sometimes get information that goes to creating their own products? I think maybe it happened. Wall Street Journal found some cases. But man, the scale of the third-party sales on this platform, there's pretty clearly a lot of people having a lot of success and a lot of customers enjoying the products that are there. So breaking that up, I think, is going to be something that at some point they're going to hear from people that say, wait a minute, this is kind of a pretty good way to shop. My own shopping on Prime Day, I got up, I think, pretty early Well, at 5 a.m., it get going at 3 a.m. Eastern time, and by 5 a.m. I was up, even though I hadn't had much sleep the previous night, and get another dose of very colorful socks that I've enjoyed wearing. I got these ones I'm wearing now from Prime Day a few years ago. I got a new writing journal. I found an Amazon Basics fountain pen for a reasonable price, and it used to be back, 10 years, maybe more. I was a big fan of fountain pens, and they were a mess. They'd always be messing up a pocket or something. But I haven't been writing much in my journal, and I thought if I had a fountain pen, maybe I'd be back at it. Bought a couple of guitar capos because the current capos just aren't holding the strings down, especially the fattest one, the sixth string of my guitar. I got a couple of things from the kids. One was Osmo Genius starter kit for Fire Tablet for ages 6 through 10. And it's kind of a hybrid device where you use the Fire Tablet, but then you're also moving around plastic pieces on the desk or the table. I also got a card game for the kids named You've Got Crabs from Exploding Kittens. Looks like just a fun game to play with my younger grandsons, Ryan and Jake. Avocado slicer. I got another one of those. I got some new biking gloves. The current ones are wearing out. Some earwax for swimming. Some new flip-flops. A mouse pad. I got a 16-piece car wash kit with foam gun, bucket, and chemicals. Now, this is kind of a laugh because I've never been somebody who was very diligent about washing their cars. But with the new Tesla, I think that might be a bonding activity for me and Darlene to be out there washing the car. She thought that was a pretty humorous purchase on my part. And etc. Got a fish spatula that looks really good as well. I didn't have quite the excitement level Prime Day this year. I don't know. Maybe I'm growing up. But one thing I did notice is that I could go into a search field if I clicked on the Prime ad, and I would be searching just the Prime Day deals. So when I was looking for earplugs, I could go in and say, well, are there any Prime Day deals on earplugs? And so that's how I found some of the things that I bought. And I don't remember it being that easy in past years to search through the deals that way. Maybe it was just there and I didn't see it. Anyway, good Prime Day, and I think the bulk of what I ordered is arriving up at the cottage today, so my daughter, Rue, who's next door, is bringing in the items for me. The other thing which arrived up in Maine today, which I haven't had a chance to get my hands on yet, I will tomorrow, is the Kobo Elipsa. And this is by Rakuten, the company that bought Kobo. It's pretty much like the remarkable tablet. It's an e-ink screen that has a stylus. You can mark up ebooks. Obviously, it has Kobo ebooks that would be on it. I won't be able to read my Kindle ebooks on it. But this is something that I always was, hoping that Amazon would do a Kindle Scribe where there would be a big e-ink screen that I could highlight my Kindle books on or annotate them with a stylus, something like this. So I'll be doing a one-on-one comparison with the Kobo Elipsa and the Remarkable. Probably I haven't done a video review in a long time, so it'll be a good chance to do that. And really looking forward to trying it out when we get back up to Maine tomorrow. I've got a couple of tech tips for you. The first is a problem which you may or may not have had given how many devices you have. But because I've been buying and updating my Kindle devices for 12 years now, and I've got some books that I've used over that same period, I ran up against a problem with a book that it's the Alcoholics Anonymous. It's sort of the big book, the text for AA that I consult frequently. And when I wanted to bring it up on my new iPad Pro, I got the message saying that this exceeded the license limit. Most publishers have say that you can, when you buy a Kindle book, you're buying the usage of it, and you can only put it on 5 or 6 devices. The problem was I wasn't really clear what these other devices were that the book was taking up space on and counting against my use of the license. So I went to Manage Your Content and Devices, and I found the book, and I just search for it in content, and I could see that it was on 6 devices, and it named them. But there wasn't a simple way from there to say, all right, take it off that device. I don't think I even have that device anymore. So what I ended up doing is just going to the Devices tab, and I took off all of the Kindle apps on old iPads, iPhones, anything I could think of. And then I came back and I went into the iPad Pro. It was fairly easy just to enter the username and password so that it was like a fresh start on my account. And sure enough, I was able to pull up the AA book. If you know an easier way to do it than wiping out the Kindle app on the various devices, I'd love to hear about it. You could send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com. But this might not have been pretty, but it did the trick, and it got the book to where I wanted it to be. The other tech tip I'm passing along, and it's sort of outside the usual genre, but we do this thing up at the beach with my 2 youngest grandsons, Jake and Ryan, who are 7 and 5. And when they're over, sometimes we say, all right, it's time to play Screens on the Bed. And what that is it's usually just me and Ryan and Jake, but sometimes Darlene enters in. And you have to be on the bed, and you have to have something that has a screen. Now, I've got a couple of extra Fire tablets, I've got an iPad, so I sort of deal out the screens to everybody, and then each person plays a different video game on their screen on the bed. And if you get bored with the game you're playing, you can say, hey, Ryan, you want to switch? And we say, sure. And what I like about this is, I think video games, the idea of a kid sort of staring at a screen and playing a video game is a little bit unnerving to me. And so I like making it more social. And when I'm on the bed with my grandsons, we have a hilarious time. And I'm always sort of coaching them. Some of these games, especially the iOS games, you'll play the game for a while and, you'll fail. And then before you can retry it, they'll put some kind of an ad in front of you. And I say, no, you got to click the X. Don't buy, don't hit my credit card. And they almost have more fun avoiding buying the games on the devices than they do playing the games themselves. So it's all pretty enjoyable. Although I enjoy playing with Ryan and Jake about the Avoid the Ads game, when I'm playing a game on my iPhone, the ads are irritating. And I learned when James joined us I think he was over there last week, and he got a screen and he was playing with us, and he saw me doing this business of the ads on my iPhone. He said, Grandpa, there's a way that you can just make it so there's no ads appear. And what he did is he went into the settings on my iPhone and he turned off the Wi-Fi, and then he also turned off the cellular. If I tap on cellular, there's a button that says cellular data, and he turned that off. And when both of those settings were turned off, I could play the game over and over without ever having an ad show up. And his way of doing it was pretty good, because I'm not going to forget to turn Wi-Fi back on, because for everything else except playing this game, I need a Wi-Fi, and I also need the 3G. Now, the game that I am playing, and I really love it, is called Helix Jump. And I've probably been playing this, a couple of months at this point. And it's a game by Voodoo is the name that comes up when I do it. H8 Games, it says. You can use your finger. I use a stylus. I use a stylus all the time. And you're turning a sort of a disc, and there's a stack of discs on a pole. And as you turn the disc, a ball falls down, and the goal is to get all the way down without hitting a certain color of barriers are there. So you're twisting around all the while, and you're trying to get the ball to get all to the bottom. It's completely mindless and very diverting, I guess it is. It's a very clean, well-designed game, and it's it's got 4.6 stars at the App Store based on 1.4 million ratings. So it's a very popular game. That's why I chose it when I first came across it. I do a fair amount of meditating, and I see a game like this as a form of meditation, but it's sort of meditation light. When I got here to Cambridge, we had some complicated travel, and I had a great lunch with my dad. But by the time I got here, I wasn't quite ready to jump into doing the podcast. So I sat for 5 minutes, and then I still wasn't ready to go. So I picked up my iPhone and I played Helix Jump for, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 minutes. And then I sat again, another 5 minutes, and I was ready to go. I could have just sat for 20 minutes, I suppose. And instead, I put in that Helix Jump as sort of a filler, it wasn't like sitting there worrying about the podcast or thinking about lunch with my dad. It was taking my mind somewhere other than its thoughts and playing. But it was not quite the contemplative experience of just sitting and following the breath and being aware of this room that I love and the green trees out and all of that. So I think I'm going to be sort of experimenting, and this comes, at the time I've gone off social media and I've got time on my hands. So I might be comparing the meditative state of playing Helix Jump with what I do when I'm following the breath on more like a Zen practice. And when I'm playing alone, I'm going to use James's technique to turn off the Wi-Fi and the 3G data. And when I'm playing with Ryan and Jake on the bed, and we all have fun being appalled at these ads, and oh, I hate that ad, I'm never going to buy that game, and Grandpa, there's the X, click on it. I'll have two modes of playing this game thanks to the tech tip that I got from James. Ben Springwater is a graduate of Williams College, and he earned his MBA at Stanford. Before co-founding Matter, a social reading app for articles, blogs, and newsletters, he worked at a consulting firm and at Nextdoor, the neighborhood community platform. I have been reading articles as a beta tester on Matter for a couple of months now, getting ready for this conversation with Ben. And one that I especially enjoyed was titled On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt, a professor emeritus at Princeton. At first I thought it was kind of a gag, but it's a serious piece. It was first published in 1986. It was later turned into an 81-page book published by Princeton University Press. And it's really a treatise on truth, very entertaining and devastatingly presented as an academic analysis of what exactly is BS and how does a BSer differ from a liar. It turns out the distinction is a meaningful one. And this essay is a good example of what you'll hear Ben talk about in his focus on reading that matters, no matter how recently it was written. Another essay that you'll hear us discuss is How I Became an Honest Broker by Ted Gioia, a music critic. The distinction in Gioia's piece is between criticism that is aimed primarily at drawing attention to the critic as opposed to helping readers discover music that they will love. That's what a curator does, and it's also a key to the mission of Matter. Ben's family, it turns out, as I said, his wife's family's been going up to Maine, and I'm kind of hoping that if they fly into Logan from San Francisco, they might be able to just take a 10-minute detour and come off the main turnpike at exit 36 and maybe have a lemonade on the porch with us. It'd be fun to see him in person. I reached Ben in San Francisco by Zoom on Wednesday, July 23rd. I began by asking how his education and earlier work experience led to co-founding Matter.
You could think of the first part of my career as not having a direct continuity into what I'm doing with Matter, aside from the fact that I have always been a big reader of articles, books, user of tools for reading. But after Williams, I went into management consulting, and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. That was a path that people take that preserves optionality and teaches you things, and you're in a cohort, and there's a lot to be said for it. And I learned the analyst toolkit and how to think in a structured way and all of that. But I ended up shifting out of that to go work at an education startup. I was working and focused on education at the time. And then from there, I went to business school at Stanford. And I was interested in social technology, and I was interested in building local community and civic community. And that's what took me to Nextdoor. Reading this whole time, it's just a background hobby and interest. And at Nextdoor, I met my co-founder, Rob McKenzie. He was an early architect at Nextdoor, built a lot of Nextdoor's infrastructure. I joined Nextdoor as a product manager, and I led the growth team and the marketplace team. Rob and I hit it off in large part because we were both big readers and big internet readers. We both used Pocket. We had used Google Reader until it shut down. And we were both frustrated by how hard it was to read online and how little progress has been made with our tools and technology. Reading is one of these big, foundational, important behaviors. And so it's kind of puzzling that our reading tools aren't better. And we set out to start Matter to do something about that.
So when you're thinking about kind of what was missing in the reading tools, and I sort of, my own history of reading tools dates back to starting this podcast the year after the Kindle was founded, and like you, always been a big reader. So much changed in my reading when I shifted to reading digitally as opposed to paper. But I think you're talking about maybe even a more recent period of when we're doing so much reading online and in ebooks and all that. When you and Rob kind of thought about what needed to be fixed or improved, what were sort of the nubs or the friction that you thought needed to be addressed?
Yeah, we think about two broad problems: what we read and how we read. What we read, the question of what do I read next, is a really interesting one to consider, because you can read anything that's ever been published. It's remarkable and quite mind-boggling. And there are things that are incredible and could change your life and are the best things to read that we have access to, but they're very hard to get to. We, of course, don't start the day and say, let me look at the whole corpus of everything that's been published and pick the best thing. That's completely non-feasible. The search costs are far too high. And so we rely on filters. We might go to the New York Times and look at the headlines. We might go to Twitter. We might get things sent to us or have other filters. And these filters, by and large, when you consider what we end up reading relative to what we potentially could read and how much better that could be, we think they're really inadequate. And there's not a place that you can reliably turn to that gives you a much higher quality selection set that helps you decide what to read next. Now, how you go about doing that is sort of a big and complex and multifaceted question. The sort of important point is that we believe that our information diets and our decisions about what to read are really suboptimal relative to what they could be. And any given decision about what to read doesn't seem that consequential, but taken in the aggregate over the course of months or over the course of your life, it's really consequential because it shapes your worldview and your knowledge and all of that. And so there's this big opportunity to improve people's reading and information diets. That's the question of what to read.
Let me stop there, because I know the second piece is how we read, but when you're on the what you read and quality, how do I know if something is quality that I've read? The impact on my life, quality can be entertaining, it can be educational, but is there any kind of it when you see it, what makes something a quality thing to read instead of just the next fast food that you might find in the Twitter portal or somewhere else even something in the New York Times or Washington Post I know exactly in my own world, when you say quality of reading, it means something. But I wonder if you understand, how do we tell if something is quality reading?
I do think that there are semi-objective properties to writing that contribute to its quality. And you could say that something is higher quality than something else. Things like the density of insight, how surprising and how nuanced something is relative to what you already know. There's quality of writing, clarity of thinking. There are traits like that. And so you could compare two pieces, like the on bullshit essay that you mentioned and some clickbait listicle, and you could say, okay, one of these is higher quality than the other. That said, the question of what is best for you to read is something that is very personal and constantly shifting and changing with your goals and your context and your mood. And I don't think it's right to think that there is some sort of, if you had a God level algorithm that could like pick all the best stuff, it doesn't really make sense. It's almost incoherent to say, okay, here's a stack ranked list of like the things that are best for you, because I think it's more heterogeneous than that, and shifting. But there might be an interest that you want to get smarter about. You might have a goal of sense making in the world and understanding what's happening in the world. And so for those different goals and contexts, there are things that are better than other things. And by and large, we're not getting to the best stuff, even given those conditions.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how we read. What's that second piece look like, and in terms of your vision for matter?
So going from the page to the screen was like this quantum leap with reading. And I know that you've been kind of tracking that deeply since the beginning. We're still, however, we think at the beginning of what's possible with reading technology. We're still words on a screen. And the implications for distribution are, of course, massive, but the way we read, it's still words on a screen. So why can't you seamlessly switch back and forth between reading and listening and have it read to you in a human-like voice? Like, that seems like something that you should be able to do. Why can't you see people's highlights and annotations and marginalia, people who you know as you're reading, embedded in context? And then there are more far out things. And this, by the way, applies both to articles, blogs, essays, reading online, and to ebooks. There are more far out things, like if you have a long piece or a book, why can't you get a 1,000-word version of that or a 100-word version of that? So compressed at variable levels, depending on the amount of time you have. And so you can see the compressed version and expand and double click. There are all sorts of powerful things that you can do with information processing that would enrich the reading experience in various ways.
I hear that term, information processing. I think of Readwise and how it feeds me highlights I've made on books in the last 10 years in a random thing. It's such a rich experience for me because I can barely even remember reading some of these books, and yet here comes a quote that I had highlighted when I read it, and that helps me to process the information I've been reading over the last decade. Is that the kind of thing you mean in information processing?
Yeah, Readwise is great. Well, I think there are a couple there are a couple categories. One is, as you're reading, help me read faster, pay attention to the right things, jump around more easily, know what to pay attention to. So there's like the act of reading itself and enhancing that. And then there is helping you to learn and remember and capture knowledge. And there are other features and flows that contribute to that, such as Readwise doing the sort of quasi-spaced repetition with your highlights, and there are other people who are working on related technologies like Andy Matuschak with the spaced repetition work that he's doing, and that's really focused on helping you learn and remember and build knowledge. And they're appropriate for different goals, but they're all part of the broader umbrella of improving reading technology. Yeah,
it's sort of part of your knowledge toolkit that you're just kind of getting better. Well, that's fascinating. Well, let's shift gears into sort of the story. You met Rob at Nextdoor.
Rob had already been at Nextdoor for many years when I got there. We met on the growth team, and we were just working together. And over the course of working together, we started talking about reading and learned that we had these common interests. And it was a line of conversation that went on in the background for quite some time, for years, before we ended up deciding to start Matter together.
Huh.
We were in San Francisco at the time.
So that was 2019 is the start. What's day one of Matter?
2019 is day one of Matter. Day one of starting to think about and talk about the threads that ended up becoming Matter was 2016, 2017.
When did the iOS beta begin?
The beta began, we called it the alpha at the time, because it was really rough and primitive. That was March of 2020.
Okay.
And we sent that to like a dozen friends. It was very rough and unpolished. And then since that time, we have progressively refined it and added features and so on.
Well, March of 2020, that was a pretty bold time to be launching. when you had those conversations the prior years, I'm sure you didn't factor in an unforeseen pandemic. How did that fact change the trajectory that brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, it's true. We set off on this journey just months before the pandemic set in. We were lucky in that we were remote from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Rob lives in Davis, California, where his wife is doing her doctorate, and I'm in San Francisco. And we started off, the two of us, remote in California, and decided early on that we wanted to build a remote company. It worked really well for us. And then the pandemic hit, and we just kept going with what we were doing. We were actually lucky in that we were relatively unaffected by things. What we're doing is pure information services. So we didn't, take a hit like a brick and mortar business or anything like that. And we were so early that we were not really affected by macro trends, although probably those trends would work to our advantage because people are at home with more time and trying to make sense of the world. And I would say that the biggest factor the pandemic had on us was it removed all opportunity cost and allowed us to triple down. We were already going to be extremely focused, but we were even more focused, and we were just basically in a tunnel for the past year working on Matter. It was a little bit of a respite and refuge for us.
That's interesting. That made it fewer distractions and people coming to you and say, hey, we want you to do this or that, and interesting serendipity there. Well, let's talk a little bit about the experience of Matter. Now, when I open up my Matter icon on my iPhone or my iPad, I see two tabs. One is Discovery and one is Inbox. What are those two things, and how does somebody using Matter move through that and some of the other features that you've added recently?
One of our foundational premises to Matter is that one of the best ways to decide what to read next is through recommendations from people we trust and people with taste. And so the idea of elevating the curator and creating a place for trusted recommendations has always been central to what we're trying to do. And that's the reason that it's the first thing that you see when you open Matter. That's the Discovery tab. And those are articles that are being curated largely from the Matter community. And we can talk separately about how we got started with that and kind of bootstrapped off of Twitter, because it was really our like earliest version of the app was just that. And we are creating a place where people can find these really good, high quality, non-obvious pieces and surface them for others. And one of the interesting dynamics there is much of the best stuff to read, in fact, the vast majority of it, is old. It wasn't written in the past week. And we have such a strong bias, generally speaking, toward what is new and toward the news. And one of the things that curation allows us to do, and we're trying to sort of create the right incentive system to do this, is to de-bias us from the new and create an incentive for people to find these old treasures and make them newly relevant by surfacing them. Should I talk more about the inbox and some of the other places in the app? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's the inbox?
Again, this question of what to read next. There's not a simple silver bullet solution. It is it admits of different answers and different entry points. And so we're designing Matter to be a place that you can save things into for later. You can follow your favorite voices and writers and newsletters and get them into the app. And so it's one place that's taking in all of the things that you might be interested in. So we think of following people and saving as like signals of your interest. And we want to give you access to them. But the way that we're planning for the product to evolve is to get smarter about figuring out what the best things from among that high volume of things you might be interested in are, and helping prioritize those for you. So you can think about Spotify as a bit of an analog, where at the home screen on Spotify, you have these different modules that give you entry points. It might be something you've been listening to. It might be a new release from one of your favorite artists, or it might be something that's a little bit more curated like Discover Weekly. And there are more besides that. And there's a very high likelihood, because there's a lot of intelligence that goes into surfacing those things. There's a very high likelihood that you're going to find something that's really good for you to listen to on the home screen. We're thinking about Matter's model along similar lines. There are big important differences between reading and music. So I don't want to imply that it's a direct translation, but the notion of one place that combines intelligence on the system's part to help prioritize things, but also gives the user control. If there's a specific thing that they added to their queue or what have you, they should be able to go find that. That's the vision for how Matter is going to evolve.
Yeah, so it's sort of a partnership between my own taste and what I think I want to read with the AI that's under the system, learning constantly and following trends and I guess learning about my own reading by how I'm using the platform.
That's exactly right. And so there's you could think of two ends of a continuum. On the one end, you have it's all algorithmic recommendation. So think Twitter, Facebook, the social feeds. On the other end, it is a pretty like deterministic, dumb product, dumb in air quotes, that gives you all the control but makes you do all the work. So think like your standard Read It Later app or RSS reader, where you there's some rules and it's just this list of stuff. Mm-hmm. And we don't think that either of those are kind of adequate, because you need control, but you also, one of the problems with those early reading products is you get overwhelmed by this deluge of information, even if it's stuff you already that you've saved. People save 5 or 10 times more than they can actually read, and they get very little help prioritizing, and there's no context that makes something relevant or socially relevant. And so we want to be in the middle of that of those two extremes. There's one other point that I'll make on the inbox, if I might. Mm-hmm. The reading and publishing ecosystem has changed a lot over the past, call it 5 years, and it's really in flux. And one of the most important trends has been the rise of the individual writer, podcaster, media creator, media personality, and the corresponding unbundling of publishers. Mm-hmm. And it's a trend that makes a lot of sense. It's higher resolution, and there's all of this great supply that is being brought online through wonderful platforms like Substack. It's great. That said, it's also a bit bewildering as an end user, because it's so fragmented. You've gone to a world of increasing fragmentation, and it's pretty clear that your email inbox is not the place that you want to do all your reading. But even if it were, that's not the place that all of these creators live. It's just some of them. And one of the things that we're like, it's pretty clear to us that, there are these waves of bundling and unbundling. And right now there's this unbundling of supply that's creating an even more bewildering experience on the consumption end. And we think it's pretty clear that there will be a new bundle for the consumer. And I don't mean bundle in the terms of a payment bundle necessarily, but a one place that you can turn to that seamlessly brings together all of the different things that you want to read and listen to, all of your creators in one place. And right now the inbox is set up to do that. But as I mentioned, the product architecture will also evolve.
One of the things I like about it, it's sort of a transition in my own reading. I'm starting to follow more newsletters than I can keep up with. And, Noah Smith and The Woman Here in Maine and Letter from an American. It's a kind of a news thing. It's great stuff, and it's just sort of very historical informed. I think she's got a background in that. And my experience is like, say, Noah Smith. The first time I started reading some of his stuff, I just said, yes, 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 and it felt original, and it's just like really great stuff. And I was just reading everything. I couldn't wait to see him show up in my inbox. A month or so after that, it was like too much maple syrup. It was just like, one great flavor. And, once in a while I read it or I don't. So to see him show up in my inbox, along with other stuff, other authors that I've identified, David Frum, different people, and then wherever else you're putting stuff in from my inbox, that's like the right amount of Noah Smith for me, as opposed to being somebody that is paying for his regular feed, which kind of makes you think I better read everything. I'm paying for it. But is that kind of the bundling you're talking about, where you give people a chance to have some input into what they want to read, but it's not sort of monochrome. You're constantly building this nice stew of authors and voices.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I tend to agree with you that we will probably, as newsletters have exploded. There are all these great newsletters to subscribe to. We subscribe to a lot of them, and now they're flooding into our inbox. And we're reaching a point, many of us, where there's more to read than we have time for. And so it's like, okay, now we need to figure out like how do we prioritize these things. Again, the idea with Matter is bring in all the stuff, all these feeds. We know you're interested in these voices. And help you pick the things that are most relevant to you, and don't create an expectation or an affordance that you should read everything. So the inbox can be in the background a little bit, and you shouldn't feel the need. It's not like a lot of people they feel like they should get through their entire email inbox. Like you have to respond to everything. Like we want to reduce the mental burden that there's an ought reading this stuff. One other point to mention there is, you brought up, you enter into this episodic relationship when you subscribe to a newsletter that is sort of by design. It's just this ongoing thing in perpetuity. And what you want from that writer might not conform to that. Like, it might be more fits and starts, or you might kind of get tired of it and want to pause. And I think our systems need to be smarter about allowing you to modulate in that way. There's another issue, which is there are all of these newsletters and writers who you might really like. You might like more than Noah Smith. I hesitate to say that. I also like Noah Smith a lot, think he's great. But there are voices that might, and there are individual pieces that they're writing that you might like more. And so the problem of discovery is not one that is being solved by the existing publishing platforms. I think that especially as we get to this like feeling of peak newsletter, people are sort of feeling like they're overdescribed. Attention is the fixed and scarce thing, and making allowing us to better allocate and invest our attention, I think is like that will always be the most important problem to solve.
There's such a hunger for that. And let's talk a little bit about the audio part of it. The on each of the things in my Matter feed, I can click a play button and I hear. It's quite a lovely reading voice. I played a little of that voice, and then I asked Alexa here to read my latest Kindle book, and I was trying to sort of hear, is one of these feel more human or natural than the other? To my ear, they were comparably natural and good, and knowing how much has been invested in the development of Alexa, bravo to whatever you've done to reach something similar. But can you say anything about who that voice is, or what kind of vision or goal you have for that piece of, and this would go back to how we read, what do you hope is happening when somebody clicks on that play button and they're listening to an article as opposed to reading it?
Our goal for audio is to make the consumption of verbal information multimodal. You should be able to read, you should be able to listen, you should be able to switch back and forth. And of course, listening, you can do listening in context where you can't read, when you're not looking at the screen. So, and like I tend to listen a lot when I'm folding laundry or doing dishes or walking and so on. And by the way, we think that the inverse is true too, where audio content, like a podcast, you should be able to read that. And that confers a lot of benefits. Some of which are you would be able to highlight and search and scan and share and post and do all of these things that you currently can't do with audio. So maybe I'm dropping a little bit of a hint there. To your first question about the voice, we actually started using Amazon's polyneural voice API. We thought it was pretty good. About half of our users liked it and half thought that it was still sounding a little bit robotic. So we spent a bit of time searching, and we found a voice synthesis service that is really cutting edge and there are trade-offs with voice synthesis around speed and cost and the types of things that are being read. And so Amazon, even though they've poured a lot of resources into Poly, they're not necessarily optimizing around the kind of reading voice that we want. But this synthesis service is. And we had to do quite a bit of work to enable that in Matter. For example, in Matter, when you're listening, you see the visual speech mark that tracks along with what you're listening to, which is important because it keeps you synced up so you can reference the text if you hear something. The service that we're using doesn't provide speech marks. Amazon did, this service doesn't. And so we have to reverse engineer them by doing speech to text to generate the speech marks. And so we've had to do quite a bit to use this service, but our users really like it. There are still some rough edges with it that we would like to see resolved soon related to the reading of numbers and dollars and things like that. But ultimately, we expect that the quality of speech synthesis is going to continue to improve, the cost is going to continue to decline, and we think that this kind of thing will be pretty ubiquitous eventually across everywhere that you're reading. And we just want to be ahead of the curve and have it integrated into the product in a way that really is attentive to detail and gives you the best user experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right. I think that'll become something everybody just expects to have that choice. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what's ahead. Your iOS now, that's how Clubhouse started, and then there was a big Android rollout. Any chance I'll be able to read my Matter feed on my Kindle Oasis, or is it probably not going to be able to go into, or Kobo, or I'm thinking e-ink screen, because when I think intelligent quality, read something that matters, I tend to do that kind of reading on my Oasis. Just there's something, I don't know exactly the lack of color. Maybe it's just sort of a trick I played with my mind. Now I'm reading something that's important. What's the visible roadmap that you can talk about going ahead from here?
Desktop web is a very high priority for us, and
Mm-hmm.
we've begun to work on it, and we're going to be launching that later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
We do plan to have some kind of export to Kindle feature. A number of people have asked about that. It's a little bit different than like us writing software for a new platform for Matter in the way that iOS, Android, and web are, because we would basically just be exporting the text and then it gets disconnected from all of the functionality of Matter.
Yeah.
But it can be a better reading experience on e-ink, and so we want to give people the option to do that. And then we will get to Android eventually. It'll be a little bit farther down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense. I read somewhere there's 3 employees. Does that include you and Rob, or what's the staffing now, and who are you looking to hire, and what's the sort of on the ground with the rollout of the workforce?
We are actually 6 right now.
Mm-hmm.
We just hired a couple engineers, and we are still hiring a design lead.
Mm-hmm.
After this bout of hiring, I think we're going to stay at that cruising altitude for a little time. I suspect we'll make 1 or 2 more hires by the end of this year. We actually, this hasn't been disclosed yet, but we just completed another round of financing. And so
Good.
we're quite well capitalized, and we have grown the team from our small team. We do, however, want to remain fairly lean, and our model of development is to have a lean, pretty senior and productive team. Our ideal organizational structure is something more like Instagram or WhatsApp before they were acquired by Facebook, where basically I think there were 20 or 30 person
Mm-hmm.
organizations that built products that were serving hundreds of millions of people. And that's been our model to date, and we want to stick with that.
Yeah. I saw somebody wrote something, it was a Medium essay, Diop Mokhtar, and you were described as a kind and sympathetic founder. How do you think you get that kind of a reputation that showed up on the internet?
Oh, well, that's touching. I suspect, I'm trying to recall that piece. I suspect that I talk to a lot of our users. I email them, we go back and forth over email a lot, and I think I'm generally pretty friendly and enthusiastic, and that certainly comes through in my email tone, and that's probably what he was referring to.
I see. That's good. Well, you could have worse reputations, especially in the startup biz. So. And are you a writer yourself? Are there anything that you've written flow through the Medium filtering at this point?
I'm not a writer myself.
You're a designer.
I'm a designer. I started my career as an analyst. I am a designer, a product person, so to speak. So I wear multiple hats on the product development and company building front, but I'm not a writer. I wrote a lot in school and enjoyed it. Sadly, didn't continue the practice.
Yeah, interesting. Well, anything else? We covered a lot of terrain, sort of close focus, stepping back. Is there anything about what you're involved in and your hopes for Matter, or what's happened that we just didn't get a chance to talk to, that you'd like to bring up before we go?
I pause and think about that for a second.
Yeah. I'll break in here to say that we are now in about a 15-second pause in the interview while Ben thought about his answer. That's the longest stretch of silent thinking I've ever experienced in nearly 13 years of doing the podcast, and I think it's kind of a tribute to the way he's approaching his task. Let's finish up with some of his silence.
In these early days of our product, we are looking to find a niche of really good readers and curators. And we think that there are a lot of great curators out there, people with tastes across a whole range of fields, where that sort of curatorial impulse is not being expressed. There's not really a place to do that. You might have an email that you send to friends and family with like a links roundup. Maybe you post some stuff on Twitter, but there's not really an outlet for being a curator. And we think that's a shame. And it's one of the things we're most focused on with the early Matter user base and community.
It strikes me that you hear so much talk about influencers. We have plenty of outlets for influencers in the current world. Wouldn't it be a relief to have some of that replaced by curators? To me, an influencer is somebody who's mainly just working their brand and trying to draw people to them, and the content that they recommend is not as important as how they're perceived or what their audience is. But to me, it'd be like that Honest Broker article by that guy. That it seems like if you could attract that kind of honest broker as your curator community, I mean, that would just be something I'd never dare miss in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. Being a good curator is hard. Like, finding all this stuff is hard. We talked about the search costs of finding the best stuff that's ever been published, but it's really valuable if you can dredge that up. It's the flip side of the coin of helping people find better stuff to read. And so amen to that.
Yeah. I have been speaking with Ben Springwater, co-founder of Matter, a social reading app for articles, blogs, and newsletters. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Len. Great talking to you.
That's it for this week. My guest next week will be the author Paul Doiron, Doiron, author of Dead by Dawn. That's book 12 of the Mike Bowditch Mysteries series. He's represented by Ann Rittenberg, who we talked with a while back. She's the literary agent for C.J. Box, who also writes about a game warden character. His is in Wyoming. And I've started reading Dead by Dawn. It's a great read. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Paul next week. I want to apologize if you stopped by the Clubhouse room Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's the usual time where we talk about the episode. I just spaced it. Darlene and I had been up until 12:30 the previous night, binge watching all 12 episodes of Ted Lasso, a hilarious and touching TV show on Apple TV Plus. And by the time 1 o'clock rolled around, I just forgot about the Clubhouse room. I promise not to forget it this week, and I hope you'll stop by and we'll talk about Matter and anything else that is on your mind. These are really fun conversations, and I look forward to resuming them this week. Hopefully I'll get a good night's sleep before that. Thanks for listening. Take care.